PIM was when it became something connected to eComs all the time. Everybody, when you build an eCom solution, you need to maintain your product data. And PIM is product information management, but eventually we label it more PXM, which is now something that Kino uses a lot, but product experience management. So it becomes kind of the product needs to tell its story. So one of the good slogans we had in the InRiver days was every product tells a story. Yeah, exactly. And I would say the same. This would be kind of a, hey, your processes are broken. So, but it's also a conflict kind of, because the eComs, they want to own as much as possible. So I see some of these old eComs as being kind of the monoliths that still are alive, and they want to have everything. And it's very intuitive for an organization to kind of, because eCom, that's what you rally around, that's what you do, and they get all the budget. So a lot of like work and processes are originated from eCom. And what happens when that arises, it kills innovation, and people start building, as you said, these small silos because they don't care anymore. They just want to have something out there.
Yeah, because if you've done it once or twice, then it's ruined anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And then somebody comes from like governance saying, oh, why we have the wrong pictures here and it's the wrong, yeah, go figure, we built this. Whoa, it's bastardized. If you syndicate from a PIM to a marketplace, you still lack data because you don't have prices, stocks, currencies. So you still have to merge data somewhere in order to have the correct data set for sending it to somebody. So that's kind of that's still around. And the problem for InRiver, at least, we couldn't manage that data. It became too complex, it became too slow, so it wasn't like possible to do it. Composable, Mac, call it what you want, but there's always, you meet complexity when you have too many players. So I sometimes say that there's a lot of duct tape solution out there, that they have so many different services. So when it was sold to the client, they were more, oh, it's going to be so much more efficient, it's going to be much more performant. We're not going to be adding so much time and material to build stuff. But when they end up with it, they just paid more bills in terms of services, and it was still the equal amount of time and material that went into kind of realize these solutions.
Hi, Jimmy, and welcome to Behind the Scenes.
Hello, good to be here. So happy to be on the pod.
Amazing to have you here. So if it's okay, let me do a quick intro of who Jimmy Ekbäck is for the viewers and listeners that might not know you. You have a degree in computer science, and in 2007, you co-founded InRiver, which now is a globally well-known PIM solution. And since 2018, you are the CTO as well as the co-founder of Occtoo. And Occtoo, if I'm not mistaken now here, correct me if I'm wrong, is a solution that makes data that is stored within a brand's IT systems easily accessible and available, for example, like to third-party apps, app creators. Was that a good summary?
That was a very good summary, Dennis. And in a correction, I was part of the founding team of InRiver as well, but it's 2009 I was there as well. So just a small correction. I was part of the founding team, and you described Occtoo very well. We make data available at the edge. So we call that experience data versus enterprise data that's maintained in the backend system. But it's very well described.
Awesome. Yeah, it will be very nice to hear about some of the insights and learnings from these years. Because if I counted correctly, you spent like 16 years dealing with product data, right?
Yeah, I spent a long time. And when you told me those dates, I was like feeling, man, I've been around for a long time, so I hope I've learned something. Well, let's see in this pod if we can educate some of the people here.
Cool. All right, then. So I really hope that we can get into some of the stories of successes and failures that you have seen. And I would like to cover, like a couple of topics related to product data. So one thing is managing and enriching product data. Another is transferring the data between systems. Obviously, organizational requirements to make this happen. And then lastly, also want to touch upon like how to future-proof the implementation of an IT infrastructure. Let's start with what the purpose of a PIM is. And maybe you can tell the story of how you were part of, or maybe the part of the founding of the InRiver PIM.
No, but it's no, exactly. It's a great. I think it's a great story at least. But I don't know. Let's see. You'll be the judge of that. For me, this started like even earlier, because before this, I was part of the CMS trend early on with Sitecore, Episerver, building web applications and all of that. So we ended up building a lot of web application based on Sitecore. I myself originate from Stockholm, but I moved down to the southern part of Sweden, close to Copenhagen, where Sitecore is founded as well. So we were early on to Sitecore and building on CMS setups with layout and data and templates. And within that, we entered into e-commerce early on. And then inside of the CMS, product data really don't fit because it can scale in different variants. It has a lot more entities to it. So it can be up to 100,000 entities, which inside of a CMS doesn't really fit and it doesn't make sense. But what we did early on is that we built something PIM-like inside of Sitecore, because it was early on was called parallel publishing, because these were in the days then a physical catalog was a thing. So you had a catalog, ordering, and you had the web. So they were the two kind of channels and then moved to channel was a printed catalog and the digital. So that's kind of how long I've been around the PIM space. So we built that inside of Sitecore, but saw that this doesn't work. And we ventured into kind of building a PIM in itself. So PIM became a thing, and there were competition coming from mainly Germany, where they had a lot of classification. They had a lot of these companies and built a long time on structuring data. But from InRiver's point of view, we looked more on the channels to make something happen faster and do more of the implementation in a shorter time cycle. So that was kind of how I ventured into PIM and how we kind of created InRiver. And the whole boom with PIM was when it became something connected to eComs all the time. Everybody, when you build an eCom solution, you need to maintain your product data. And PIM is product information management, but eventually we label it more PXM, which is now something Akinio uses a lot, but product experience management. So it becomes kind of the product needs to tell its story. So one of the good slogans we had in the InRiver days was every product tells a story, which I think is still a great slogan, which they don't use anymore. I still think it's great.
But basically, you said that the product should be able to tell a story, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And in order to do that, obviously, you need to be able to provide the data so that it can tell a story, right? And that was kind of the point of having the PIM, so that there would be one place. Before the PIM, how would they structure? Where would they store the data?
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a good question. That's kind of what we ventured in. And in the beginning, we were competing with the ERPs. They said but we have the data in the ERP. It's the article, because it's like the SKU. But where do you maintain data? Is at the lowest level, you maintain the data on SKU level. The SKU level is often like facts, the pallets, the weight, the dimension, stuff like that. It's not something that kind of trigger you and me then as to wanting to buy something. That's like it's the facts, and for shipment, for storage, for whatever. So the PIM was the level above, and you don't want to enrich. If you have in the fashion behind the scenes there, you have often size and color, and they share a lot of attributes. You don't want to maintain the same data on all of these different attributes. You want to have a hierarchy where you have product, item, and perhaps SKU levels. So some of the data you maintain on the top level, and then that's inherited down to the other levels. So that's kind of where it became kind of a thing. You become more efficient with the PIM, and you can inherit a lot of data, but also media, which is not something that the ERPs work with. So media is, of course, a huge thing when you want to sell something.
Why is it the case that after, since you started 2007, right? Like the PIM was founded. I can imagine at that point in time, there wasn't really much happening.
It wasn't even an acronym. Yeah,
it wasn't even an acronym, exactly. And since then, there has been so much development. I assume there's almost no e-commerce company right now, no brand that do not have some sort of PIM.
Which it's a very I can jump in, but that's a very good question, because some of them claim to have a PIM, but it's also, I usually do the analogy with like, why aren't ERPs the best e-coms in the world? They had like a head start of like 15 years. But it's usually the domain you operate in is so complex that it's hard to you can't add whatever, because there's so much in a specific domain that you have to cater to. So it becomes too complex at one point. So all the eComs, they have enough on their plate and they can't do the best PIM. They all have from the get-go a product catalog, which they all have, but it's far from being a full-fledged PIM with all the features and the functions that you need to operate and maintain product enrichment phase and knowing where to go. And to be honest, still a PIM caters to more than just the eCom.
Exactly. But if that is the case, one would really wonder then, why is it still that a lot of the data, or I should not say a lot, but quite substantial amount of data still is enriched outside the PIM? And maybe I can just give you an example of a case that we have going on right now. So as you can see here, right? Yeah. So as you can see, I'm just at Jack & Jones, one brand that we work with, and they have attribute called top models, and I can click on Mike and Chris here, and I would obviously get these products. But it turns out these values and this attribute, it's not on the PIM, it's on the e-commerce. And I can point out several new in and some other stuff here.
I've seen,
what's up with this? Why is it this way?
I would say the same. This would be hey, your processes are broken. So, but it's also a conflict because the e-coms, they want to own as much as possible. So I see some of these old e-coms as being the monoliths that still are alive, and they want to have everything. And it's very intuitive for an organization to because e-com, that's what you rally around, that's what you do, and they get all the budget. So a lot of work and processes are originated from e-com, but it's now being a bit more decoupled. So there's more, and you see that not only your e-com front end, that's not the only place to meet your customers. You have to have these micro front ends. You have to meet customers in many different places. And if you have everything inside of the e-com, you have to build everything from the e-com.
So if I understand you right, there is basically an agenda from the e-com providers or the e-com platforms to own as much of that content. That's how I interpret you, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Now that's headlines. Jimmy says there are hidden agenda amongst the e-com players. So
they want their data locked in.
Who doesn't as a software vendor? So it's goes without saying.
Okay. Because I was otherwise thinking that sometimes the users see that there's a problem in the data, right? Or they want to enrich it. And I've sometimes felt like those people that we interface with when we work and collaborate, they're a little bit too far away from the managing the content, which means that they tell someone that, maybe does it or maybe doesn't, so that they're fuck it. We just implement it in the e-com.
Now that you're telling you, that's the case all the time, and that's and I've seen it. We work with big enterprises like Richemont and Cartier, which is and then it's sometimes you can't be creative because there's so many instances that need to validate your change in order for you to do something, and then that's the way we've operated with Occtoo, that we're a semantic layer on top, and if data is activated in Occtoo, then you can start using it. You don't have to go to these subsystems to ask for permission to do something. And if you want to change something that's perhaps adding something, you can do that in Excel, shoot it into Occtoo, and then you don't have to go to the PIM team, to the ERP team, and they have to have meetings, and then they say, oh, we have so much in our roadmap. You can have it in 18 months, which I've seen in H&M, which is very long time cycles in order to do anything. So what happens when that arises, it kills innovation, and people start building, as you said, these small silos because they don't care anymore. They just want to have something out there.
Because if you've done it once or twice, then it's ruined anyway.
Exactly. And then somebody comes from governance saying, oh, why we have the wrong pictures here and it's the wrong, go figure, we built this. Whoa, it's bastardized. Can't have it like that, but that was the only way to solve the problem.
But one does feel very much pressured because when they realize that they cannot get the data fixed in the core in the PIM, they do they do put a lot of pressure on us. I was about to say the ones that do the applications, to just make a setting, a configuration.
Yep.
So it's a dangerous path. It's fast, but it's dangerous.
Yeah, no, it's sweet, but sometimes you have to do it. But I agree, like that's a slippery slope that you have to navigate in order to end up in the right spot.
But in that case, let's just check out this picture here. I'm sure you've seen this before, and it's also not unique to InRiver by any means. Like a lot of PIM solution providers, they would model it kind of this way, where to me, this one looks like you said we're missing 60% of the data. First question would be, what is the data that should be in a PIM? And now that you're not working at InRiver anymore, maybe you can just say, like, what is it that you should put in there and for sure not put in there? Because it connects to ERP, PLM, external data. I would probably just assume a lot of Excel files as well.
Yeah, it
and
can be
then
whatever.
Here you see like stock management and data stock. And I mean, there's just anything can really be put into InRiver, I guess.
Depends. I think what they usually stay away from is transactional data and sales data. So when you say ERP, it's usually the item numbers or EINs or whatnot and assortments. So price and stock, everything that usually is like fast moving is harder to maintain inside of a PIM, and everything that changes a lot, kind of typically stock that changes a lot. That's not a typical, because PIM is a process of enriching and creating ready to be published product from an information point of view. You have like a tangent to this, which is called MDM, Master Data Management, which is a sibling to a PIM, or PIM is a sibling to MDM, depending on how you see it. But that's like Master Data Management, and you manage everything, and they can have everything. But there's also like a complexity barrier there. So it's all like speed versus complexity. But I would say, so when you look at ERP, it's not prices and stock. PLM is more capturing everything from an creation process. External data, as you say, it can be Excel files and whatnot. There is, in a good PIM, it's a good media management. So every media connected to the product should be in there. Product marketing depends what you mean with it, but I think it's like the facets and the other things that you can build around it, that you can have campaigns and campaign attributes and campaign assortments can be tagged inside of a PIM. Category management is the facets that you put on the products, but it depends on category management is so much wider also than you have inside of a PIM. So it can be planning inside of stores or other things and then it's not category management on that side. And the hard part for PIM, it's a backend system. It's a system of records. So it doesn't get any feedback. If you do category management, I would like to know, how is my category doing? Is it selling? How often is being looked at? If it's in stores, which stores are using this, or are the there's a feedback loop here that is missing to the PIMs, which is their biggest problem. And when they look at product, they have a slice of the product data. As you and I discussed before, we said product related data. Product data is so much more than PIM data, as we say price, stock, and just supplier, retailer connection with all their, like my EIN, your EIN, supplier ID number, brands. There's so much discrepancy and work going in there in order to make your product work in my channel.
Yeah. Maybe a sensitive question, but again, talk about the agenda of the various suppliers in the landscape, in the ecosystem of systems.
Who to make enemies.
Yeah, exactly. Would it be the case that PIM providers, not just talking about InRiver, but in general, that they would rather have a little bit more data than what they probably should? Or do they usually have like a clear distinction? Like, here's the data.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think the PIMs are in a position where they can be pretty clear on what they need. And I think back in the days when I think that still is a truth, that InRiver is really firm on that it's everything, like it's enrichment, it's creating data around the product. It isn't prices, it's not price management. They're pretty clear on that, and I think they still are. And stock data and stuff like that, it's not part of what they do. And usually, as is this published, I think this looks like an old picture, but I don't know. But it's, they push data to the web, and then there's a work inside of the web or the e-commerce or the marketplaces. So there's something else, and then it's the edge where somebody's building a front end based on the data that lands inside of these systems here as well. So a PIM doesn't have a real, you can't query PIM and get a result really fast. The PIM is more of it pushes data, more of a tractor, pushing data. It's quality assurance. Nothing goes out of the PIM that isn't ready to be sold in a specific channels. It's a lot about quality management, completeness, all the different languages. So it's making every product shouldn't look the same, but it should have the same quality level. Nothing leaves the PIM without the right quality. Okay. And I think they're pretty firm on that. And then you have the MDMs, the multi-domain data. They want everything, and they have a solution for everything. But then you open up for a lot of complexity. I will say it's like white robes and a lot of like, I put on the glasses now to see, or small pictures as well. So, but it carries complexity.
All right. So if the promise of the PIM is to assure a high quality being pushed as a tractor to the various channels,
in lack of better words,
yeah, that was a good analogy. Yeah. So one thing that I have seen happening from time to time is that the users that then consume the data that was pushed from the PIM might not agree that it is of high quality. Of course, this most likely is a human administrative lack of time or effort, so to say. Just want to ask you about AI. Like, what do you think the opportunities are in terms of applying it within the domain of a PIM?
Yep. No, I think it's a great opportunity for the PIMs, and also, but they need a feedback loop as well, because what do you create? But it's like, for me, AI, and certainly generative AI, it's internet is the source, and it has a lot of so if you have generic information that you need to create, then that's a good source. If you want to have language learning models or large language models based on your own data that needs to be more knowledgeable about your own data, you need to source your own data and then run that through the different algorithms. So it's like people need to maintain their data in a better way and unify their data. So I think for PIM, there can be this generic way and like looking what's the best way to describe, because it's like a t-shirt or a white t-shirt or what's has the most traction, but they need to collect a lot more data from how everything is perceived in the channels. But I agree, for PIMs and product, which is sometimes staples, then no-brainer. I think it's a huge opportunity, and all these translations and stuff like that have them taking giant leaps in how to do all these things and generate even pictures and media.
Do you know if it's already been implemented into?
Yeah, but to some extent, that's everything with AI. All softwares have AI, but it's very like small samples, and it's not as efficient as people might think yet. But it's definitely going there. Everybody has it on the roadmap, so that it will come.
All right, let's jump to a next topic about data accessibility and specifically transferring of data. Again, looking at this picture, it looks like InRiver is supposed to push like data to all of these channels, right? Like this is where you get. And then if you really zoom in to this picture, or these arrows that goes very nicely, you will basically see the way it is today. There's a bunch of developers and then custom code written all over the place to
if you zoom in. That's some good. Like then we would like to be able to zoom in and see all this.
No straight lines in here, I can tell you. And the worst part is also that while transferring the data, it's custom enriched and then cleaned in some of these cases. And was this the point when you guys created InRiver, or is this like simply never supposed to be solved by the PIM system? And maybe just also give like example. We have a customer that pulls data out of InRiver into an Excel, enriches it, puts it on an FTP that then is loaded into a code and then pushed to our system, enriched in that way. And I'm like, but this is data that you have in the PIM system that you enrich outside the PIM system.
You have to do an introduction to Occtoo here. I hear that like loud and clear.
No, but, so tell me what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. No, but the idea, because it was also, we have to remember that this is like, as you said, back in the days. It's like, I don't want to count how far back in time we are. But when we, like, technology was different when InRiver was built, and it had transitions as well when we did this. So, but you couldn't, what we do at Occtoo, you could never do when we were at InRiver. It wasn't possible technically to do it. But the idea was always, because you don't want to push data to somebody else's backend and become kind of what they dictate for you to be. So the best would be that if the PLP and PDP was owned by the PIM, because they are not going to somebody else's model and you lose data, custom code, and you have to do. But the problem also for PIM, they don't have price. They lack a lot of data, what's needed. So there's always this like problem. And if you syndicate from a PIM to a marketplace, you still lack data because you don't have prices, stocks, currencies. So you still have to merge data somewhere in order to have the correct data set for sending it to somebody. So that's kind of that's still around. And the problem for InRiver at least, we couldn't manage that data. It became too complex. It became too slow. So it wasn't like possible to do it.
Did you try? I mean, was there an ambition to try?
Yeah, we had like we had something in InRiver called InRiver Connect, where you have RESTful APIs. You could query data right away, but all these eComs, they have their molds. You have to push data into them, and that's kind of how. And the great thing with that's why InRiver became as big as it became. The connections together with Optimizely, with Salesforce, with all these vendors that was around back in the days, even Sitecore as well. So that was a huge success in setting all of this up. But so that was the idea. But that's also the idea where Occtoo came from, to be that performance layer, to be that semantic data layer where you can do that final touch-up before it reaches something, and it can be as fast in Tokyo as in Gothenburg as in London. So it doesn't really matter, and it can unify all these data types. So 50 million entities is not a problem for Occtoo, but for a PIM system, it's a challenge. So that's kind of the reasoning behind that. That is, it is complex, and technically it was very hard to do it. So never the intention to be this backend system, but PIM are system of record. They are backend system. They are quality. Because I always like architectures and how you build softwares. If you build for enrichment and system of records, you have a process for maintaining data and keeping a state of the data. If you're built for consumption, you can build it in a different way. So that's kind of why Occtoo, we can do what we do, but we can't do what the PIMs do, and vice versa as well. So it's a difference there, but I agree. It's similar data sets that you carry around, and you want to keep them or the integrity of the data needs to be as intact as possible.
Okay, so what you're proposing is that there should be a system that gathers data from various sources, collects them, dices them, and connects them according to certain rules that are defined in this platform.
As close to the channel as possible.
Exactly. Exactly. So it can be multiple rules depending on the channel. And then that would basically gather and combine them into a structure that is directly then pushed to that channel.
Yep. But with the source data, like the core data, that's also the integrity of the data. So you don't break, as we started with, you don't want to break that chain. So you become like a silo, because then you don't get the nice updates or the nice work that others do in that chain of content.
How do you then, when you get pressured into, can you just make that special addition to, remove that underscore in the style ID? Like, you don't need that one.
Yeah,
and push it.
It's good. Yeah, but there's always these fine tunings, and that's why the closer to the channel, you need to do more adjustment to fit to that channel, and that's fine. That's the way it works. I don't think we can never change that, because otherwise it would be one giant database with like standardized things that everybody can pull from. But that's never going to happen. So like, let's leave that idea. But what we have inside, how we think at Occtoo, is like we are that bridge that takes it from keep this as it is. It just carries on with enriching, creating, building. You funnel that and you repurpose the model of the content structure all the time, and as close as possible to the channel. You can do all of these, and we even have, as we have you guys, a formatter that can apply to your format, so you can even change it to exactly what you need, but the link to the original data is still there. So you haven't kind of snapped that. So that's the way we think. But if you need extra data for your channel specifically, why don't use Excel? Like, because if it's a campaign app or it's a smaller one, and if it's maintainable, add it in there, have more facets, have a specific thing that makes it work. You don't have to be too anal in the way you work with this as well, because sometimes I think it's like, then you do nothing. Like, innovation is about failing as well. So like, we have to do more stuff in my mind, at least.
No, certainly. But it basically means that you are proposing then a centralized solution before reaching out to the channels, right? Like, you have a lot of decentralized systems. You centralize all of the data, and then from there on, you can basically provide the data to each one.
Yeah, just exactly, to some extent, at least. That's what Occtoo is. So you're describing Occtoo, so I can't argue with that. But it's more like, we call it unifying, because that makes it a lot easier for the front end, because everything is consumable from one place, and it's already linked together. You get much more, because if you want to create relevance in the front end or even something to work, data creates relevance. So the more data you can capture, the more relevance you can create.
All right. Do you also imagine that data that is then created on each of the channels that is unique to those channels? Maybe it's a CMS, maybe it's just user data.
Yes.
Would that, and that might be of relevance for a different channel in order to sort or present, recommend, whatever it might be. I have been in cases where the products come from PIM and so on, and then they ask us, but can't you just interface to that solution out there and then communicate directly? So I'm like, what is really your vision? Not vision, but what do you think about the possibility that there could also be a case where everything is standardized protocol-wise in between suppliers of tools or services, and then they're responsible for getting the data that they need from whatever IT service that is within that ecosystem of that brand.
Yeah, no, but I like that. But it's also then as soon as you're gonna like protocols, and then it's never gonna work. But now we're pretty generic in kind of everybody's in the cloud, and it's not hard to kind of connect with somebody. But I early on envisioned that you had this like big warehouse of data that anybody can connect to and pull whatever they needed to describe something, and then people put up their data there because it's good. The more that can describe your products, the better off yours. It doesn't really matter, but then it's like a lot of like brand integrity and stuff. Like, one thing I like is like user interactions. So Occtoo APIs are real time. Sometimes we push data to somebody, then we don't get kind of a feedback loop. But what happens when something renders? That's interesting. When was it? Who did it? What did it do next? So all that information or session data is interesting. So when we're live on sites, as with some of our bigger customers, we get all that data back. It's interesting for BI, for other channels, even for the PIM. We enrich this like this. We think this picture worked. Did it or did it not? So it's interesting to get that feedback loop. Then you have other things that could be channel specific based on, doesn't really matter. So I think like editorial stuff in the CMS, it could be interesting, but yeah, probably built for the site, or inside a mobile phone, it just takes too much place. So it depends on that. But then again, it can be, because we used to call it cross-channel, that you go between different channels back in the day. So you have cross-channel commerce, which I never hear these days. But it's in, as a consumer, I expect to be able to, because if I start a journey somewhere, I want to continue it somewhere else. So I expect a brand that I trust, like I don't feel creepy if they help me or guide me in these different sales channels they present to me. I kind of expect that. If it's retargeting and I bought kind of a fridge, I don't want to be presented with 10 more fridges. That's just creepy. And I think like, get real. So I think that's a challenge, as you say. How do you kind of track, and now with the not using cookies in the same way, and it's more zero-party data. You kind of share more data with the brands you trust and less with the ones that you don't trust. There is something in that's going to be materialized as we move further into the future. But I think as a consumer, you expect that kind of behavior from these touch points.
Yeah, but do you think it's realistic to expect that the service providers themselves start sharing the data among each other, or is it more realistic to have this monolith central service that
I think
Occtoo represents?
Exactly. I think it's you framed those pretty bad, like not monolithic, but I think it's hard because if you look at Composable, nobody sits on the whole data set, so then it becomes horizontally who's going to own all the data, and they're not built to they're built to enrich data. The CRMs and CDPs, they have the customer card and lots of insights from the customer, the PIM as the product card, and then you have sales data in the ERP or other system, production data in the PLM and whatnot. So and all these dispersed other systems. I think there's they will never solve it. And if they share, and a question that I would like headless or Composable or whatnot, if they all, like everybody has had APIs forever, so that's not the problem, but somebody needs to unify that data. Otherwise you as a consumer need to hold all that data and unify it, and then you're like, that's a big project, and you can't do that every time you have an ID. You're going to do that big project of unifying all of that data, and then you can build a cool front end or a cool sales channel. So that's what Occtoo solves. It's done one time, and then you can repurpose and reuse it. So then you accelerate the innovation. And if one of these initiatives died because it was a bad idea, you haven't kind of busted the whole year's economy or budget by trying that out. But so I think that's more or less the way we see it. So
So what you're basically saying then is, if a brand, if you're IT manager or a digital responsible of a brand, you have multiple of these systems. When you want to go ahead and create a new application, a new channel, do not directly necessarily interface each of these. So either build a team or something to basically do what you guys are doing, or work with Occtoo, but basically capture the data in one place that is much less rigid, and you can do much more customization for each channel, right?
100%. Yeah, that's exactly. And then also to say that, then you have like a lot of data layers that people build, but they're usually kind of for monitoring. They're not for exposing or creating APIs, which I think API is the way the modern marketing technologies will start communicating, because everybody needs to be able to create APIs. That's what we actually talk about here, that how do I create an API for you, Dennis, so you can do cool stuff with your solution? And all services need data, like so, and they all need it in their format. So who caters to that? And that's kind of why we built Occtoo, because we can onboard data from this backend system within like days and hours versus long projects. But there are a lot of people making money, of course, within integration. So that's also something that you have to like adhere to. But I think you're absolutely to the point that you don't want to be strangled with this challenge every time you have an ID.
Yeah, that's cool, because it kind of leads me to my next topic, which is the requirements of experience, skill of the organization, of whoever's going to manage this thing. You have to bring this together. So maybe you can talk to those brands that have successfully created. How did they do it? What was the learnings there? I mean, any stories or anecdotes about that would be interesting. As equally as well as if they've failed on some parts.
No, but exactly. It's a big question. So I'll see if I can manage it. But I think in terms of like the organization, it's more. I think it's product related, but it's not only PIM related. So it's more or less depending on if you're a brand or if you're a retailer. That's a different thing as well. So and it can be other type of services as well. But I think it's assortment planning and assortment, and then enriching with kind of what facets, what product, what media. The studio, because media is such a big thing. So that's kind of, you have to have that process aligned. And then it becomes to your sales organizations in kind of how do you present things on your eCom with like pricing strategies, setting down prices, campaign launches, how good are you at putting your products into the market? I think that's also something that you need to look at. But what we've seen with Occtoo, then the acceleration you get from that, and I can take two examples from a very traditional industry within luxury with a company or a brand called Cartier, which is owned by Richemont, which is very rigid in the way they want Cartier or the brands to operate. But Cartier is more innovative, so they wanted to do things themselves. So by getting Richemont data into Occtoo, they owned their own data as Cartier and can start innovating with that data instead of going and asking for data all the time. So when they did that, they also since they're worldwide, they let the different markets come with IDs as well and not centralize the brand IT helping everybody. But they say, hey, markets, you can be creative. We can expose data to you. And from that, the Japanese market said that they could sell wedding rings online or on mobile phones, which generally in Paris with the headquarters, they're like, no way, like we can't sell these. That's not possible. So what they could do was go outsource a Japanese agency, build a Japanese front end with all the UI that complies with that market and that culture. And then with Occtoo APIs exposed, they could just hook onto them. And then they had an integration with Adyen, and they had a mobile commerce selling hyper expensive diamond wedding rings in a mobile app in Japan, which I think is a pretty cool thing, because that would never happen if they went to Richemont IT, say, hey, we have an ID, we want to sell diamond rings in a mobile app. They say, no, it's a boutique experience. You guys know this. It's like traditional. But now they could try it out, very small budget, and they could prove value. And then they could, like, look, this works. And then nobody can argue with it. And now it's going to be rolled out worldwide. So I think that's a pretty cool how it fosters innovation when people get access to the data, not even like the kind of owning companies IT and then the brands IT, but even out to the market. So you kind of distribute or decentralize innovation, but you still control the data centrally. So I think so the quality of the data was always there. It's not as you and I started with it. It wasn't a siloed set of data that they would just agitate people. This was the right data and wasn't a problem. So there were no quality issues or anything with it. So I think that's a good idea. And that's kind of, but they had a development team to build the front end, and then they had like people coordinating these initiatives more or less also when you're building
it. Exactly. Maybe you can talk more about what is it within their team, like what type of skills do they have in their team that made them able to do that, right? Like, why cannot everyone do it? Does
exactly.
it require something?
Yeah, no, I think the thing that and they would stumble on that as well. So it's always you start, because people understand design and how something looks. So you always start with a great design. So you have Figma and you draw stuff, and everybody's like, amazing. But then that amazing design needs to correlate with the data we have. And usually when they have that, then people start like scratching their hairs. That's why I look the way I look. But then they kind of understand that, okay, so we can only deliver on 30% of this design vision here because we don't get access to the data. So what they had here, they did the vision, but they also had people knowing what they had inside of Occtoo that was propagated from SAP, from a Diamond ERP, from a PIM system, from a sourcing system, from a stock keeping system, knowing kind of where the diamonds, because it's very important that you have the diamonds, you can actually deliver the rings. It was kind of, so all of that was already in place, so they can look at that and they knew, okay, so this data we have, so that's what we can build a vision on. So they knew their data, and they had the vision and the front end skills to kind of build a very small POC or an MVP, call it what you want. So I think that's what they had. Otherwise you end up with that kind of, where's the data?
Yeah. Okay. How much did you guys have to help out to, the gaps that they lacked in terms of development resources or the technology?
Very little. So what Occtoo provides in this case is that we had other initiatives with Cartier. So all the data was already inside of Occtoo. So that was very easy. So they themselves could slice what we say segments. So they had a Japanese diamond rings, boom, inside of an API. And then the front end was built by these agencies. We were never included in this.
Very nice. All right, and maybe a last big question from me is
no small questions here. We just go big.
The big ones. So, looking at the implementation of technical infrastructure, right? Like setting up the whole thing. You mentioned composable before, headless, a couple of different keywords, but just as you've been part of a couple of these projects before even it reaches the app layer, just setting up the whole backend stuff, what are the non-success cases? What are the failures that people like bump into maybe over and over a time that they should stop doing?
I think that's a great question to I don't know, finish off with, but it's to wrap it up with. But I think composable, Mac, call it what you want, but there's always, you meet complexity when you have too many players. So I sometimes say that there's a lot of duct tape solution out there, that they have so many different services. So when it was sold to the client, they were more, it's going to be so much more efficient. It's going to be much more performant. We're not going to be adding so much time and material to build stuff. But when they end up with it, they just paid more bills in terms of services, and it was still the equal amount of time and material that went into kind of realize this solution. So kind of up to date, I would say some of these haven't made true to the promises that were made to this when venturing into these composable setups. So I think there's a lot of those out there, because it's still kind of feeling around like in this front end what's actually needed and who does what. And that's kind of where we as Occtoo push the envelope, saying, hey, the data is here, it's real time. Like, why do you like push it into all these other places? Because you have to look at the components you need. You probably need a search, you need CMS for some editorial content. I love digital. I think it's underused. I think you can do so much more digital inside of the stores. If you use like the geographical location with digital, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. And then of course you need something transactional to kind of create the order. So I usually say attract the purchase and then complete the purchase.
Yep. All right, I think we're almost 1 hour in, Jimmy, and cool. I think there's been some great sharing of.
It was a fast hour, I must say.
Yep. Yeah, it went really fast, but it was also great, especially I feel like I have a slightly better understanding of the PIM system and the architecture. So
cool.
Thank you for joining Behind the Scenes.
Nice to be here, Dennis.